All right, well, let's see. Time to talk to the opposition leader, Peter Dutton. To take us there, here's Danielle Wood from the Grattan Institute on this argument that the tax cut is targeted at middle income earners.
It's certainly true that anyone over $45,000 will get a tax cut, but the tax cuts are vastly larger for those on high income. So someone earning over $200,000 will get a $9,000 tax cut, whereas it's only a few $100s at those lower income levels. I would argue that we shouldn't totally scrap the package, that we might rework the package in a way that still gives tax cuts across the board, but is less generous, costs the budget less money, and is less skewed to those on high incomes.
Peter Dutton, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David.
Is that something you would support? Everyone would still get a tax cut, but those earning more than $200,000 a year would get something smaller than the $9,000 they're currently slated to receive.
Well, David, what we've seen this week is a real split between the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. And Treasurer, I think, demonstrated his inexperience. He's obviously very close to Wayne Swan. He studied Paul Keating very closely, and he's been out there pushing a particular argument, and the Prime Minister, I think sensibly, has abandoned that. Now, he may well instinctively be in favour of abandoning his promise. Sure he is. I'm sure ideologically he's opposed to it. But the fact is that this is not an issue now about tax cuts. It's about whether you can trust Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party. And they've still got, it seems, in their back pocket the prospect or the option to reverse this key promise that they made at the election sometime between now and the next election. And I think most Australians would be astounded that Anthony Albanese was on the cusp of betraying them, or may do, or is contemplating doing that in the next budget or the one after.
Let's talk about the policy itself, though. I mean, how much would those earning $50,000 or $80,000 a year actually receive under stage 3?
Well, David, you can look at it in two different ways. You can look at it in terms of the disparity of a few hundred versus a few $1,000s, or you can look at it in terms of the sum of tax paid by somebody on $120,000 as opposed to $45,000. The average wage in our country now is about $92,000, and Anthony Albanese stood with workers, people such as fly-in, fly-out mine workers who sacrifice time away from their families, and they try and set themselves up financially. He told those people, as did Bill Shorten, that they are truly, in his mind, in terms of honouring or committing to this tax cut, that they would be the beneficiaries. Now, I think those people will be shaking their head because there's a lot of people on $90,000, $100,000, $120,000 who believe in 4 or 5 years that they will be on $180,000. And good luck to them. They've studied, they've worked hard, they've got their own business, they've worked up through a business, they've sacrificed time away from their families. It might be a young single mother, a young lawyer, somebody who's worked really hard, and that aspiration's there. And Anthony Albanese tapped into that in the last election. Bill Shorten was more honest.
Let me come back to the policy, though.
2019.
Just sticking with the policy, though. Someone on $80,000 would get about $900 a year under this tax cut. Someone on $200,000 gets about $9,000. Back to the original question: would you support any change to wind back the scale of the tax cut at the top?
No, David, we went to the last election with a promise, and I'm not in the business of breaking promises, so the Prime Minister can contemplate it. He looked the Australian public in the eye, and it seems that he wasn't so genuine and that he was prepared to make that statement.
If Labor did wind these back at the top, if Labor did wind these back at the top, you'd go to the next election promising to restore them?
That's our policy, David, and we've been clear about it because it doesn't start until July of 24.
That's our policy. Sounds like what Anthony Albanese has been saying all week. So at the next election, though, you will want to see whatever's been trimmed returned at the top.
I want to see the Prime Minister honour his commitment and not lie to the Australian public.
I'm asking your policy, your position.
They've contemplated whether they'll lie to the Australian public, and that's clearly still in their mind. We will take a policy to the next election, and when we're successful at the next election in government, we will honour it without any asterisks, no fine print.
A policy
the
though
Prime Minister knew the level of debt.
A policy that gives high income earners $9,000 a year tax cut.
David, the proposal that we've got is 3 stages, right? They're all legislated. The stage 1, stage 2 for lower and middle income earners, stage 3 for middle income earners, and those on higher incomes. It was a complete package.
And
the whole idea
was
that
at the next election. You'd want to stick with that at the next election. I'm just wondering how committed you are now to the stage 3 tax cuts, whether you go to the next election promising to keep them.
I'll just finish what I was going to say. So the proposal of stage 3 is to reduce 32.5 cents down to 30, to abolish the 37-cent tax bracket altogether, so that it provides support for aspirational people, for people who want to be earning that sort of money over the next few years. And the Prime Minister's seen fit to provide support to families who are earning $400,000 a year in the childcare system, to give them that support. So I expect that we'll see other taxes within
your position?
The budget. There'll be... Well, David, again, we'll see what they do in the budget in a couple of weeks' time.
All right, that's a caveat then. That's a maybe.
David, I don't know what sort of game you're playing. I'm saying
just asking
we
a question.
went to the election.
Would you want to see
commitment.
these stage 3 tax cuts remain in place?
Of course I do, and I couldn't be any clearer about that. What I'm concerned about is that you've got a huge split between the Prime Minister and the Treasurer at the moment. You had the government out there seriously arguing to break this promise, and I think most people would be amazed. We had 3 stages of tax cuts. They've all been legislated. The Labor Party supported the legislation in the Parliament, and the Australian Prime Minister promised at the last election on multiple occasions that he wouldn't step back from it, and it seems that he's still contemplating that sometime between now and the next election. And I think that would be an unforgivable and ridiculous mistake.
Can I ask you this? If the tax cuts, the stage 3 is such a good idea, why didn't the coalition implement them in 2018 when they were announced?
Because it was a staged process, and I think
why though?
Calendar 23 is going to be a difficult... Well, because there are periods in which you can bring these in a responsible way instead of a one-year hit to the budget.
What,
and that's
responsible
exactly
because the budget was in deficit? Was that why?
Well, David, if your point is, is that the budget in deficit, yes, it is. And the government knew that when they made the promise. Only weeks ago, and as you pointed out before, the government's not 5 months old. Weeks ago, they were still absolutely committed to these tax cuts. So it doesn't start until 24, so it's not inflationary over calendar 23, which is an important point. And we are going to need, I think, given what's going to happen in the US and the UK, and potentially a global recession, we are going to need stimulus in 24, and it's exactly the right timing. And I think we're thoroughly vindicated in terms of the policy that we had, so much so that Labor voted for it in the Parliament.
Look, the budget's still going to need repairing, though, if we stick with these stage 3 tax cuts. What's your answer to fixing the bottom line?
Well, again, if you look at even post the lockdowns on a month-by-month basis, you can see months where we've gone back into surplus, so that the settings that we had in government, our instinct as Liberals, as a coalition, when it comes to budget management, are vindicated. When you look at where we are with a 50-year low of unemployment, where you look at the strength of the underlying indicators here in Australia, that is a very significant contrast to where the UK or the US budget is. And this government inherited a very strong position after 9 years of coalition management, and you can see that Labor Party's instinct
forecast for the next 10 years
on taxation, economic policy is all wrong, and this is the problem. I mean, governments have always got to deal with events as they come along. Labor's instinct on the economy and on the budget is always the wrong one.
I want to move on. Look, you met the ASIO boss during the week to discuss the families of ISIS fighters who are stuck in refugee camps in Syria. You said you came away from that briefing, quote, more convinced that it is not in the national interest of our country to repatriate these people back here. Peter Dutton, did the ASIO Director General tell you it was unsafe to bring them home?
Well, David, I made very clear during the week I'm not going to disclose my conversation with the Director General, and that's, as you would expect, it was a top-secret briefing. It obviously built on the intelligence and the advice that I'd received when I was in the National Security Committee not that long ago, and it's clear to me that on what I know and what I've read and what I've heard and been informed on, that we can't provide the level of surety to the Australian public. Now, is it a terrible situation for the families? Absolutely. I mean, if you were a parent or a grandparent of a daughter or grandchild in that situation, of course you want to bring them back home. I mean, any human being would have that feeling, that emotion. I mean, that's perfectly logical. But I think we need to be realistic about kids who have been in that setting, or women who have been in that setting, mixing with terrorists and people that want to commit terrorist attacks over a period of time. It costs, as the Australian Federal Police Commissioner points out, about $3.8 million a year and 300 police officers to 24/7 monitor one individual.
Well, that figure, I've heard you use that figure a few times. Just to be clear, that was a reference to one convicted terrorist who'd been released from prison. There's no suggestion that monitoring women or toddlers would cost anything like that.
Well, if somebody is deemed to be a risk, so somebody who comes out of prison, for example, that hasn't rehabilitated, or somebody who comes into Australia that has the same intent as the person who has come out of jail, it's the same resource demand. Nobody's talking about monitoring toddlers, for goodness sake. I mean, that's just a nonsense argument. When you look at kids who have strapped, vests to themselves in horrible circumstances, and the indoctrination that's taken place, even online, kids here or in the UK or New Zealand or elsewhere, you can imagine the intensity of living in one of the camps where that constant conversation is had about how much they hate the West or Australia or plan to take out,
But we're not talking about teenage.
Whatever it is. I mean,
we're not talking about teenage boys here, though, are we? I mean, most of these kids are under 6 years of age. Just coming back to your comment, though, about the ASIO Director General, when you said that you were more convinced not to bring them back after your meeting, that does build the impression that he influenced you somehow. Did he raise a level of concern with you, or did he in fact say that there is a great risk in leaving them there as well?
Well, David, I'm not going to go into the conversation that I had with him, and I'm sure that he would both respect that and also honour it himself. As I say, okay. I've looked at these matters as Home Affairs Minister. I brought back orphans, and we did it in a discreet way with a package of support around those. But to
so
your
why
point,
was that okay under the Morrison government to bring back eight of these kids, or eight of these children? One was 18 years old, but not now.
Again, because it was on the advice that we had to us at the time. It was the age of the children. It was the fact that they were orphaned.
Similar age, though, isn't it?
We had a significant. Well, so to your point, if you've got a family of 4, you've got mum and 2 toddlers, a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old. Do you split the family and bring only 2 of the children, the toddlers, or do you bring everybody in that family unit? These are the issues that you have to grapple with.
As Home Affairs Minister, you introduced the Temporary Exclusion Orders Bill, and it was specifically aimed at dealing with these situations of returning foreign fighters, actually. You said this bill will ensure that law enforcement agencies can effectively manage these returns in a way which will reduce the threat to the Australian community. Does the law work?
Well, it was one of 11 pieces of legislation that we introduced to keep our country safe, and I'm proud that as Home Affairs Minister, working with the Australian Federal Police and ASIO, we were able to stop terrorist attacks in our country. But the fact is that the threat hasn't gone away, and as much as I feel for those families, for those kids, they're horrible scenes, and the fact that somebody has taken their children or their wife or a family member into that theatre of war is tragic. But I've also got to think about the safety and security of toddlers of other families here. And if we think that the threat has gone away, that people wouldn't act out, that there couldn't be an explosion in our country, then I think that's an incredibly naive approach to what's a very difficult and complex situation.
A couple of quick ones. You've called on the Essendon Football Club to reinstate Andrew Thorburn as CEO. He quit or was forced out over his role as chair of the City on the Hill Church, given some of the views expressed at that church about homosexuality and abortion. Should organisations, though, be free to hire CEOs who share their values?
Of course they should. They shouldn't discriminate against people that they don't share values with. That's the reality of our society, and I don't care Mr Thorburns' religion. They're not views that he's expressed to my knowledge. The views were expressed in a sermon by a pastor, which I condemned when I made the point in relation to Mr Thorburn. He's distanced himself from that, and I think if you look at his track record as the CEO of NAB, he was inclusive. There were no complaints about his conduct or the way in which he treated people or discriminated against anyone. In fact, quite the contrary. And I think we're in a dangerous position in our country where we can discriminate against somebody because of their Christian values, their religious adherence to whatever religion it is. He didn't seek to play that out. It wasn't he who gave the sermon, and he's got a religious belief. It's different to yours and mine. But that's, I mean, we live in a great country where we should tolerate that, and he shouldn't have been excluded on that basis.
Should organisations be able to hire and fire based on someone's sexuality?
Well, I don't support discrimination on any basis, to be honest. And
so religious schools shouldn't be able to sack a gay teacher?
Well, again, we've had these debates over the last couple of years. And
what do you think?
Go into Chris Bowen's electorate, which obviously there's been a lot of comment from local mayors there this week about different issues. There are Islamic schools, Christian schools, Jewish schools in our country who want to teach their faith, and they should be free to do so. And if they've got children who are being enrolled in that school by their parents, the parents expect that there will be an adherence to that doctrine.
So when you said just a moment ago, you don't support discrimination on any basis, that's except for religious schools and gay teachers.
Well, again, David, if you're of a Jewish faith and you're sending your child to that school, it's for a reason. You've made a decision that you want to send your child there to receive religious instruction as part of a more general education, and that should be unhindered. So any thought that somebody can be discriminated against in the circumstance of Mr Thorburn is completely unacceptable. And as I said, I think the decision should be reversed and he should be appointed back to the position, because his track record as an employer, as a chairman, as a manager is an impeccable one on the evidence that I've seen.
Final one, Liberal Party Vice President Tina McQueen says Conservatives should rejoice that Liberal moderates were defeated at the election. She says she was trying to get rid of them for decades. I know of one of those Liberal moderates who was defeated at the election who reckons she's spat in their face. What did you make of the comments?
Well, they were unacceptable comments and they won't be repeated, and there won't be any response to them. There's a desire here to win the next election. We'll only do that with discipline, and the party I lead is frankly, having grown up under John Howard and Peter Costello, and that's the approach that I take. A winner-takes-all approach in the Labor Party or the Liberal Party doesn't work, and we need a broad range of views.
Should she go? Simon Birmingham, your Liberal Party Senate leader, says she should resign. What do you think?
No, I don't agree with that. She's expressed a view. She's made a mistake. I've made it very clear that it won't happen again.
She apologise?
And that's what I would expect. That's what I expect on both sides. I'm not going into,
should she apologise?
Well, I'm not going into internal matters beyond that. All I've said is that there was a mistake made. It shouldn't have been said. It won't be said again. We are a broad church, as Howard's pointed out on many occasions, and that's the way that we'll continue into the future. We want people from diverse backgrounds. We want to have seats across the country, and we can only win the next election if we're able to do that. And I think I've demonstrated that through my career in the Liberal Party, and that's the doctrine by which we will continue to operate.
Peter Dutton, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, David. Thank you.